The phone rang at 4:47 in the morning. I know this because I looked at the clock, the way you do when something pulls you from sleep. That instinctive, animal turn toward the glowing numbers on your nightstand, as if time itself might explain why your heart is suddenly pounding. As if the hour could justify the intrusion or warn you about what comes next. 4:47 a.m. February in Toronto. The kind of cold that seeps through double-paned windows and settles into your bones even under 3 blankets. The kind of darkness that feels permanent, like the sun has forgotten this corner of the world exists. I remember thinking, this is the call. The one we all wait for when our parents get old enough that time becomes a held breath. The call that divides your life into before and after. I was 63 years old, retired 18 months from a career building bridges and highways across Ontario. And in that moment, before I answered, I was still a daughter with a living mother. My name is Marianne Caldwell. And if you've ever loved someone whose time is running out, if you've ever watched the calendar like a countdown you can't stop, then you already know the weight of a ringing phone in the darkness. I answered on the 3rd ring. Marianne? My sister's voice. Valerie. 2 years younger than me, though she'd spent our entire lives acting like she was the elder, the wiser, the one who understood how things really worked. Marianne, I have news. Not bad news, no, not I'm so sorry, or you should sit down. Just news, delivered in that clipped, efficient tone she used when she was about to tell you something she'd already decided you would accept. What time is it? I asked, though I already knew. Stalling, buying seconds before the world changed. It doesn't matter what time it is. Mother is dead. 3 words. Mother is dead. They hung in the darkness of my bedroom like something physical, like I could reach out and touch them. Like if I moved too quickly, they might shatter and cut me. What? My voice didn't sound like my own. When? How? I just spoke to her yesterday. She passed in her sleep, peacefully. The doctor said it was her heart. Which doctor? Dr. Patel? I thought her heart was... The last checkup said she was stable. Her medication was... Marianne. Valerie's voice sharpened, the way it always did when I asked too many questions. When I didn't simply accept whatever she was telling me. Mother is gone. I'm handling everything. The funeral arrangements, the estate, all of it. You don't need to worry about anything. Something cold moved through me. Not grief. Not yet. Something else. Something that felt like the moment when you're driving on ice and you feel the tires lose their grip. That fraction of a second before you know whether you'll recover or crash. The estate, I said slowly. Valerie, what do you mean you're handling the estate? A pause. Too long. The kind of pause that happens when someone is deciding how much truth to portion out. I have power of attorney, she said finally. I have for months. Mother signed it over to me when she started declining. Declining? What are you talking about? I talked to her yesterday, Valerie. She was sharp. She was asking about the grandchildren. She remembered Emma's recital next week. You talked to her on her good days. Valerie's voice had shifted into something softer now. Patronizing. The tone you use with a child who doesn't understand why they can't have dessert before dinner. The doctors diagnosed her with dementia 3 months ago. Early onset. It progresses quickly at her age. I didn't want to worry you. The room tilted. Or maybe I tilted. I sat up in bed, pressing my free hand against the mattress to steady myself. Dementia, I repeated. 3 months ago, and you didn't tell me. I was protecting you and protecting Mother. She didn't want everyone to know. She was ashamed, Marianne. You know how she is about appearances? How she is. Present tense. Already Valerie was talking about our mother in present tense, as if the woman she'd just pronounced dead was still here, still caring about what the neighbors thought. I want to see her, I said. Where is she? Which hospital? She's at Thornwood Funeral Home. I've already made arrangements. The viewing will be Thursday, the service on Saturday. I'll send you the details. Thornwood? That's in Oakville. That's an hour from her house. Why would you? Because it's where I live, Marianne. Because I'm the one handling everything. Because I was the one who was here. The accusation landed where she meant it to land, right in the center of my chest. I was the one who was here. Never mind that I lived 40 minutes away, not 4 hours. Never mind that I visited every Sunday, called every day, drove her to appointments whenever she asked. Never mind any of that. In Valerie's story, she was the dutiful daughter, and I was the absent one. And facts had never been allowed to interfere with Valerie's stories. I'll come today, I said. I'll come right now. I need to. The funeral home doesn't open until 9. Get some sleep. I'll call you this afternoon with the details. Another pause. And Marianne? About the house and Mother's accounts. There's nothing for you to worry about. I've handled everything. Mother wanted me to have it. All of it. She told me, right before at the end, she wanted me to have everything. The line went dead. I sat there in the darkness, the phone still pressed against my ear, listening to nothing. She wanted me to have everything. That's when I knew. If you've ever had a moment when something you couldn't name, something deep in your gut, started screaming at you to pay attention, then you know what I felt. It wasn't grief. It wasn't shock. It was the same instinct I'd relied on for 40 years of engineering. The sense that something in the structure was wrong. That the load-bearing walls weren't where they appeared to be. That somewhere in the blueprint, someone had lied. I got out of bed. I turned on every light in the house. And I did something I should have done the moment I heard my sister's voice. I called my mother. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I counted each ring like a heartbeat, like a prayer, like the moments before a verdict. 4 rings, 5. And then, on the 6th ring, a voice I knew better than my own. Hello? Confused, sleepy, alive. Mom. The word came out broken. Mom, it's Marianne. Marianne? Sweetheart, what time is it? Is everything all right? I started to laugh. Or maybe I started to cry. In that moment, they felt like the same thing. This wild, uncontrollable release of something that had been pressing against my ribs since the moment I'd answered Valerie's call. I'm fine, Mom. I'm fine. I had a bad dream. I needed to hear your voice. At 5 in the morning, my mother's voice was clearer now, sharpening with concern. Marianne, what's going on? You sound strange. I pressed my hand over my mouth, trying to steady my breathing, trying to think. Because now I understood something that changed everything. My sister had called me in the middle of the night to tell me our mother was dead, and our mother was very much alive. Which meant one of 2 things. Either Valerie had made a horrifying mistake, confused perhaps, or misinformed or suffering from some kind of breakdown. Or Valerie had lied. And if Valerie had lied about our mother being dead, then what else had she lied about? The dementia diagnosis, the power of attorney, the claim to the estate. She wanted me to have everything. Mom, I said carefully, when did you last talk to Valerie? A pause. Valerie? Oh, let me think. She called. Was it Tuesday? Or Monday? She's been calling more often lately. Checking in, she says, wanting to know how I'm feeling, if I'm taking my medication. Very attentive. A dry laugh. You know your sister. She's never been this interested in my health before. I keep telling her I'm fine, but she insists on asking the same questions every time. What day is it? What did I have for breakfast? Who's the Prime Minister? The questions. Cognitive assessments. The kind of questions someone asks when they're trying to establish a pattern of decline or create one. Mom, have you signed anything lately? Any legal documents? Anything Valerie asked you to sign? Silence. Too long. Mom, I'm trying to remember. Her voice had changed, smaller now, uncertain. She brought some papers. A few months ago, she said they were for my protection. In case anything happened to me. She said it was just routine, that everyone does it at my age. Marianne, I didn't read them very carefully. My eyes aren't what they used to be. And Valerie said, "It's okay, Mom. It's okay." My mind was racing now, building a structure out of fragments. power of attorney, control of accounts, a fabricated diagnosis, a phone call in the middle of the night announcing a death that hadn't happened. Listen to me. I'm going to come see you today. Don't talk to Valerie before I get there. Don't sign anything else. Don't let anyone into the house who you don't recognize. Can you do that for me? Marianne, you're scaring me. What's happening? What's wrong? What's wrong is that your daughter, my sister, just called to tell me you were dead. What's wrong is that I'm starting to understand that this wasn't a mistake. What's wrong is that I'm looking at the blueprint of something terrible and I can see exactly how the structure is supposed to collapse. Nothing's wrong, Mom. I just miss you. I'll be there by noon, okay? We'll have lunch together, just like always. All right, sweetheart. I'll see you soon. I love you. I love you too, Mom. I hung up the phone. I stood in my kitchen, in the too bright light of every bulb I owned, and I felt the shape of what was coming settle into my bones. My sister was trying to steal our mother's estate. She was trying to steal our mother's life. And she had called me at 4:47 in the morning to begin the cover-up, not realizing, or perhaps not caring, that she had made one critical mistake. She had assumed I wouldn't check. If you've ever built anything, a bridge, a house, a career, a life, then you know that construction and destruction follow the same rules. You start with the foundation. You work your way up. And if you want to understand why something fell, you trace the cracks back to where they began. I spent the next 6 hours becoming an expert in my sister's lies. First, I called Dr. Patel, my mother's physician for the past 15 years. The woman who had overseen her recovery from a broken hip, her management of mild hypertension, her annual checkups that always ended with the same reassurance. Your mother is remarkable for her age. Whatever she's doing, tell her to keep doing it. Dr. Patel answered on the second ring, already at her office, despite the early hour. Mrs. Caldwell, is everything all right? Is it your mother? That's what I'm trying to find out, I said. Dr. Patel, I have a strange question. Has my mother been diagnosed with dementia? Silence. The wrong kind of silence. Not confusion, but recognition. The silence of someone who has just realized they're standing in the middle of something complicated. Mrs. Caldwell, I think you should come to my office. There are some things we should discuss in person. I was there in 20 minutes. Dr. Patel's office was the same as always. Calming blues, framed diplomas, the faint smell of antiseptic beneath the artificial lavender. But Dr. Patel herself looked different. Tired, worried. The kind of expression that settles onto someone's face when they've been carrying a weight they're not sure how to put down. Your sister came to see me 3 months ago, she said, after I'd declined tea and settled into the chair across from her desk. She had concerns about your mother's cognitive function. She said your mother had been forgetting things, getting confused, exhibiting paranoid behavior. And you believed her? I didn't have any reason not to. She's family. And the symptoms she described were concerning enough that I agreed to schedule an evaluation. Dr. Patel's hands folded on her desk, then unfolded. A nervous gesture I'd never seen from her before. But when I saw your mother for the evaluation, she was fine. Better than fine. Sharp, engaged. No signs of cognitive decline that I could detect. I told your sister that her concerns appeared to be unfounded. And what did Valerie say? She wasn't satisfied. She wanted a second opinion. She said she'd found a specialist, someone who worked specifically with elderly patients exhibiting early-stage dementia. A Dr. Raymond Holt. The name meant nothing to me, but the way Dr. Patel said it, carefully, as if the syllables themselves were contaminated, told me everything I needed to know. You don't trust this Dr. Holt? I looked him up after your sister mentioned him. His credentials are unusual. He runs a private practice out of a clinic in Mississauga. Very expensive. Very discreet. He specializes in what he calls comprehensive geriatric assessments. But I couldn't find any peer-reviewed research, any hospital affiliations, any professional connections that I would expect from a legitimate specialist. Dr. Patel met my eyes. Mrs. Caldwell, I've been practicing medicine for 30 years. I know what a real doctor's career looks like. And I know what it looks like when someone is playing a role. You think he's a fraud? I think your sister found someone who would tell her what she wanted to hear. And I think your mother may be in danger. There it was. The word I'd been circling all morning. The shadow I'd been trying not to look at directly. Danger. My 84-year-old mother, alone in her house, caught in something she probably didn't even understand was happening. There's more, Dr. Patel said. After your sister's visit, I received a request to transfer your mother's medical records to Dr. Holt's clinic. And last week, I received a notification that your mother had been prescribed a new medication, haloperidol. It's an antipsychotic, common in treating severe dementia patients with agitation or psychosis. She paused. Mrs. Caldwell, when I saw your mother 2 months ago, she didn't need antipsychotics. She didn't need anything except her blood pressure medication and her vitamin supplements. Someone has convinced her or forced her to take a drug that could cause serious side effects. Confusion, memory loss, the very symptoms of dementia that your sister has been claiming to observe. The room went very still. Or maybe I went very still. And the room continued around me, unchanged by the revelation that had just restructured everything I thought I understood. My sister wasn't just lying about our mother's condition. She was creating that condition. She was drugging our mother to manufacture the symptoms that would justify taking control of her life, her money, her everything. Can you prove this? My voice came out steady. the engineer in me, the part that had spent 4 decades solving problems, running calculations, building things that wouldn't fall down. Can you document what you've just told me? I can document my own examinations and my professional concerns about Dr. Holt. But Mrs. Caldwell, Dr. Patel leaned forward, her voice dropping. What you're describing isn't just elder abuse, it's fraud. It's potentially criminal. You're going to need more than medical records. You're going to need evidence, financial records, legal documents, witnesses. Then that's what I'll get. I stood up. Dr. Patel stood too. And for a moment, we just looked at the other 2 women on either side of 60. Both of us understanding that something had shifted in the world, that a door had opened onto something dark, and we were both about to walk through it. Thank you, I said, for telling me, for paying attention when something didn't feel right. Your mother is my patient, Dr. Patel said simply, and she deserves better than this. I drove to my mother's house, an hour through traffic that I barely registered, my mind running scenarios, building cases, imagining the confrontation that was coming. By the time I pulled into the familiar driveway, the same driveway where I'd learned to ride a bike, where I'd kissed my first boyfriend, where I'd loaded my car the day I left for university, I had something that almost resembled a plan. Almost. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She looked the same as she had last Sunday. Silver hair pulled back in the same practical bun she'd worn for as long as I could remember. Eyes bright behind her reading glasses, a slight stoop in her shoulders that had appeared sometime in the last decade when I wasn't paying enough attention. She was wearing the blue cardigan I'd given her for Christmas. And when she saw my face, her own expression shifted from welcome to concern. Marianne, what's wrong? I hugged her. Tightly. The way I should have hugged her every day, every visit, every moment I was lucky enough to still have her in my life. She felt smaller than I remembered, more fragile. Or maybe that was just my fear, reshaping her in my arms. I need to talk to you, I said. About Valerie, about everything. We sat at her kitchen table, the same table where I'd done my homework as a child, where she'd taught me to roll pie crust, where we'd sat together after my father's funeral 15 years ago and learned how to be a family of 2. I made tea because making tea gave me something to do with my hands. And while the kettle boiled, I told her everything. The phone call, the lie about her death, Dr. Patel's concerns, the medication, the power of attorney. My mother listened without interrupting. Her face didn't change. Not shock, not anger, not grief. Just stillness. The same stillness I remembered from my childhood, when she would listen to me explain why I'd failed a test or fought with a friend, absorbing the information before responding. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and took my hands. I know, she said. 2 words. and with them, the ground shifted beneath me again. You know, I've known for months, sweetheart. I've been waiting to see what you would do. My mother's hands were warm around mine, steady. The hands that had held me as an infant, guided me through childhood, waved goodbye at countless doorways. And now those hands were telling me something I hadn't expected. That she was not the victim I'd imagined, but something else entirely. Let me explain, she said. She got up from the table, slowly, carefully, the way she moved now that her joints protested every transition, and walked to the counter. From a drawer I'd opened 100 times without noticing anything unusual, she withdrew a manila folder. Thick, heavy with papers. I want you to understand something, Marianne. I'm 84 years old. I've been a widow for 15 years. I've watched your father's friends die. My own friends die. Neighbors I've known for half a century carried out in ambulances that never brought them back. I've had time to think about what happens at the end. What matters? What doesn't? She set the folder on the table between us. When you get to my age, everyone assumes you've lost a step. Your children start speaking more slowly when they talk to you. Strangers raise their voices as if hearing is the same as understanding. Doctors ask you what year it is, and you can see them waiting for you to fail. You become invisible and suspect at the same time, too old to be taken seriously, too old to be trusted with your own decisions. She sat down again. Her eyes met mine, and in them, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Not the gentle, slightly absent look she'd worn to family gatherings and holiday dinners, but something sharper, clearer. The look of a woman who had been watching the world very carefully and had seen exactly what she needed to see. 6 months ago, I started noticing things about your sister. Small things at first. Questions about my finances that felt rehearsed. Suggestions that I should simplify my accounts, consolidate everything in one place for convenience. Concerns about my health that didn't match how I felt. Valerie has always been hungry, Marianne. You know this. She's been hungry since she was a child, hungry for attention, for approval, for anything that would make her feel like she was ahead. I always thought she'd grow out of it. I was wrong. Mom, what did you do? She opened the folder. Inside, I saw bank statements, legal documents, photographs, what looked like transcripts of phone calls. I did what any good engineer would do, she said, and the ghost of a smile crossed her face. I studied the structure. I traced the cracks, and I reinforced the foundation before it could collapse. Over the next 2 hours, my mother told me a story. 6 months ago, she had begun to suspect that Valerie was positioning herself for something. The questions about her accounts, the insistence on scheduling wellness checks, the appearance of Dr. Raymond Holt, who had shown up at her door one afternoon with Valerie by his side, speaking in soothing tones about early intervention, and protecting her autonomy, phrases that rang hollow even as she nodded along, playing the part of the confused old woman they needed her to be. I let them think it was working, my mother said. The pills they gave me? I never took them, not once. I flushed them down the toilet and put on the show they expected. Slower speech, repeated questions, forgetting names I'd known for 50 years. It wasn't hard, Marianne. When people expect you to fail, all you have to do is give them what they're looking for. While she played the part, she had been gathering evidence. Bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals from accounts she deliberately left accessible. A trap, essentially. Money she'd earmarked to see how far Valerie would go. Legal documents that Valerie had asked her to sign, which my mother had photographed before and after signing, documenting Valerie's additions and alterations. Phone conversations recorded on a device my mother had purchased at an electronics store, operated by a 16-year-old employee who had shown her how to use it because my grandmother had the same phone and I know how confusing they can be. I've been building a case, my mother said, not because I wanted to destroy your sister. I don't want to destroy her, Marianne. She's my daughter. I loved her from the moment she was born. And I've never stopped loving her, even when I understood what she was capable of. But I needed to know the truth. I needed to see which of my daughters would choose me over what they could get from me. And there it was, the test beneath the test, the structure beneath the structure. You were testing us, I said slowly. Both of us. I was watching, my mother said, to see who would notice, who would ask questions, who would call me at 5 a.m. because a phone call didn't feel right. She reached across the table and touched my cheek the way she had when I was small and scared and needed to know that someone was paying attention. You passed, sweetheart. You've always passed. You never wanted anything from me except my presence in your life. You never calculated what you might inherit or positioned yourself to receive it. You just loved me the way family is supposed to love. I felt tears on my face. I hadn't noticed them starting to fall. What happens now? I asked. My mother's expression shifted. The softness retreated, replaced by something harder, something that looked almost like satisfaction. Now, she said, we finish what Valerie started, and we make sure she understands exactly what she's lost. That afternoon, I met Margaret Chen. Margaret was a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but the kind of lawyer who made other lawyers nervous. 67 years old, silver-haired, wearing reading glasses that she had a habit of removing when she wanted you to know she was seeing you very clearly indeed. She had retired from a career prosecuting white-collar crime, and she had come out of retirement for exactly one reason. She hated bullies. Your mother called me 3 months ago, Margaret explained. We were sitting in her home office, a room lined with law books and family photographs, and the kind of heavy furniture that announced serious work happened here. She'd heard about me through a mutual friend at her church. I took the meeting expecting to give her a referral to someone who handles elder law. By the end of the hour, I was drafting a strategy document. My mother, it turned out, had done more than gather evidence. She had assembled all the allies. Margaret was one. Dr. Patel was another, brought into the circle early, sworn to secrecy, tasked with documenting everything she observed from a medical perspective. And then there was Robert Okafor. Robert was a private investigator, former RCMP, 20 years on the force before he'd moved into private practice. A large man with a quiet voice and eyes that missed nothing. The kind of man who could sit in a room for an hour without anyone noticing he was there, and leave that room knowing everything that had happened in it. "I've been watching Dr. Holt," Robert said, when the four of us convened at my mother's kitchen table that evening. "He's exactly what we suspected. Medical degree from a Caribbean school, no board certifications, a history of disciplinary actions that got buried through legal maneuvering. He runs a cash practice. No insurance, no oversight, no records, unless he wants there to be records. He's been involved in 3 other cases like this that I've found so far. Elderly patients, wealthy families, sudden cognitive decline that conveniently coincides with someone getting power of attorney." "And Valerie?" I asked. Robert opened a folder. Inside were photographs, documents, spreadsheets, dense with numbers. "Your sister has been busy," he said. "Over the past 4 months, she's withdrawn approximately 180,000 from your mother's accounts. She's placed 2 liens on your mother's property using the power of attorney she obtained through Dr. Holt's diagnosis. She's transferred ownership of your mother's vehicle to herself. And 2 weeks ago, she met with a real estate agent to discuss listing your mother's house for sale." He paused. "The listing was going to go live next Monday. The asking price was $1.2 million, which is about 300,000 below market value. I suspect she wanted a quick sale. The numbers landed like blows. 180,000, 1.2 million. The house I'd grown up in, the house where my mother had lived for 50 years, reduced to a transaction designed to strip it from her as quickly as possible." "She was going to sell everything," I said. "And then what? Put Mom in a home, claim she was too demented to live independently." "That's exactly what she was planning," my mother said quietly. "She told me as much on one of her visits. She thought I didn't understand, that the words were going over my head. She sat right there." She pointed to the chair Robert was sitting in, and she told me I'd be happier in a place with professionals who could take care of me. She said I wouldn't need the house anymore, wouldn't need the burden of managing my own affairs. She patted my hand and smiled, and I could see it in her eyes. The way she'd already spent the money, the way she'd already moved into my house in her imagination. Margaret leaned forward. "Mrs. Caldwell, I have to ask you directly. What do you want to happen to your daughter?" because what she's done is criminal. Elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraud. If we pursue this fully, she could face prison time. My mother was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady. I raised 2 daughters, she said. I taught them both the same things, or I tried to. Be honest. Work hard. Love the people in your life more than the things you might get from them. I don't know where I went wrong with Valerie. Maybe I didn't go wrong at all. Maybe some people just make choices that can't be traced back to their upbringing, can't be explained by their circumstances. She looked at me, then at Margaret, then at Robert. What I want is the truth. I want Valerie to face what she's done. Not in the shadows, not in private, but openly. I want her to understand that she can't steal from the people who love her and walk away unchanged. And if she goes to prison, then she goes to prison. I'll grieve for the daughter I thought I had, but I won't protect her from the consequences of her choices. Not anymore. The plan took 2 weeks to assemble. During that time, my mother continued to play her part. Valerie called daily, asking the same cognitive questions, noting the same concerns in whatever records she was keeping. My mother answered slowly, confused, grateful. The perfect victim, sinking exactly as expected into the fog of manufactured decline. Meanwhile, the rest of us prepared. Margaret worked with a forensic accountant to document every financial transaction Valerie had made using my mother's accounts. Robert continued his surveillance of Dr. Holt, gathering evidence of his pattern of fraudulent diagnoses. I went through my mother's house with a fine-toothed comb, photographing every document, every signature, every piece of paper that might become relevant. And my mother made one more move, the move that would bring everything to a head. She told Valerie she was dying. The doctor says it's my heart, my mother said during one of Valerie's daily calls. I was in the room listening on speakerphone, watching my mother deliver the performance of her life. They don't think I have much time left, maybe a few weeks, maybe less. Valerie's response came after a pause, the kind of pause that occurs when someone is calculating, recalibrating, adjusting their timeline. Oh, Mother, I'm so sorry. We should make arrangements, make sure you're comfortable, make sure everything is in order. I want to see everyone, my mother said, before I go, all my friends, my family, everyone who matters. Will you help me plan a gathering, Valerie? Something beautiful, something to remember me by. And Valerie, seeing the finish line suddenly closer than she'd expected, said yes. The gathering was scheduled for a Saturday in March. A celebration of life, Valerie called it, though the life being celebrated was still very much being lived. Invitations went out to 30 people, family members, old friends, neighbors who had known my mother for decades. A catering company was hired. A venue was booked. A historic inn outside the city, with a beautiful garden where my mother had once told me she wanted her ashes scattered. My mother paid for none of it. Valerie, convinced that she would be reimbursed from an estate that was about to become hers, covered every expense. What Valerie didn't know was that my mother had spent the past 3 months quietly protecting her assets. The accounts Valerie had access to, the ones she'd been draining, contained only a fraction of my mother's wealth. The real money, the investments and properties my father had left behind, had been moved to accounts Valerie knew nothing about. Managed by attorneys Valerie had never met. The house that Valerie was planning to sell had been transferred to a trust, with me as the sole beneficiary. A transfer made months before Valerie obtained her fraudulent power of attorney, and therefore immune to anything Valerie tried to do with it. Valerie thought she was planning a funeral. She was actually planning her own unmasking. The morning of the gathering was cold and clear, the kind of March day when the sky is so blue it hurts to look at directly, when the bare branches of trees cast sharp shadows on the frost-hardened ground. I arrived at the inn early, ostensibly to help with preparations, actually to watch my sister in her element. Valerie was already there. She wore black, of course. Elegant, expensive black. The kind of mourning attire that announced both grief and taste. She directed the caterers with quiet authority, adjusted flower arrangements with a critical eye, greeted the early arrivals with the precise mixture of sorrow and composure that the occasion required. She was magnificent. And watching her, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not hatred, but something closer to awe. My sister had constructed an entire world around her lies, a world in which she was the devoted daughter, the responsible caretaker, the one who had sacrificed everything to tend to our failing mother. And she had constructed it so completely, so seamlessly, that I almost believed it myself. Almost? The guests arrived throughout the morning. My mother's neighbors from the old block, their faces creased with sympathy. Her friends from church, from the garden club, from the bridge group she joined after my father died. My daughter Emma, 23 years old and freshly graduated, who hugged me fiercely and whispered, "Grandma's going to be okay, right?" in my ear. I squeezed her hand and said nothing because the answer was too complicated for the moment. By noon, the room was full. 30 people, maybe more, gathered to mourn a woman who wasn't dead, to celebrate a life that was continuing in ways none of them could imagine. Valerie stood at the front of the room, preparing to deliver the eulogy she'd written for our very much living mother, and I realized that I was holding my breath. "Thank you all for coming," Valerie began. Her voice was steady, pitched perfectly between emotion and control. As many of you know, my mother has been declining over the past few months. The doctors say her time is short. We wanted to gather everyone she loves one last time while she's still able to. The door at the back of the room opened. My mother walked in. She was not shuffling. She was not confused. She moved with the deliberate grace of a woman who had lived 84 years and learned something from every one of them, who had built a life on purpose and integrity, who had been underestimated for the last time. Behind her came 3 police officers, and behind them, Margaret Chen, carrying a folder thick with evidence. Valerie's mouth was still open, frozen mid-sentence. The eulogy she'd prepared fell from her hands, sheets of paper drifting to the floor like snow. "Hello, everyone," my mother said. Her voice carried across the silent room without effort. "I apologize for the confusion. As you can see, reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. What followed was not dramatic in the way movies are dramatic. There was no shouting, no desperate escape attempts, no theatrical confrontations. What there was, instead, was something quieter and more devastating. The slow, methodical dismantling of a lie. Margaret Chen presented the evidence to the police, while the guests stood frozen, unsure whether to leave or stay. Caught in a situation no etiquette book had prepared them for. My mother sat down in a chair near the front of the room and watched Valerie the entire time, her expression unreadable. And Valerie did what she always did when cornered. She lied. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, her voice rising toward panic. "Mother is confused. She has dementia. I have medical documentation. This is elder abuse. You're all traumatizing a vulnerable woman." "Mrs. Caldwell," one of the officers said calmly, "we have a warrant for your arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say?" "I haven't done anything wrong. I was taking care of her. Ask anyone. Ask the doctor." "Dr. Raymond Holt is in custody," Margaret said. "He was arrested this morning on charges of fraud and medical malpractice. He's currently cooperating with investigators." The room had gone completely silent. Even the caterers had stopped moving, trays of finger food suspended in mid-air, witnesses to something they would tell their grandchildren about. Valerie looked at me. For the first time since I could remember, she looked lost, confused, as if the world had rearranged itself without her permission, and she couldn't understand the new configuration. "Marianne," she said, "Marianne, please, you're my sister, help me." I thought about the phone call at 4:47 in the morning. Mother is dead. I thought about the power of attorney, the stolen money, the plan to sell our mother's house out from under her. I thought about all the years of smaller cruelties, the pointed comments, the calculated exclusions, the way Valerie had always positioned herself at the center of everything while pushing everyone else to the edges. And I thought about what my mother had said. I needed to see which of my daughters would choose me over what they could get from me. "I'm helping you," I said. "For the first time in my life, I'm helping you see the consequences of your choices. Maybe something good will come of it." The officers led Valerie out. She didn't resist. She seemed, in those final moments, to have collapsed inward, to have become smaller than I'd ever seen her. The elegant black dress, the perfect hair, the careful composure, all of it dissolved, leaving behind someone I almost didn't recognize. Almost. The trial took 8 months. During that time, I learned things about my sister that I had never known. The debts she had accumulated over years of living beyond her means. The second mortgage on her house that she had hidden from her husband. The pattern of small frauds and deceptions that stretched back decades. Money borrowed and never repaid, promises made and never kept. A life built on the assumption that consequences were for other people. Dr. Holt pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison and stripped of his medical license. Not that it had been worth much to begin with. In his testimony, he described the scheme in clinical detail. How he had been approached by Valerie, how they had developed the plan together, how easy it was to exploit the assumptions people made about elderly patients. No one looks too closely, he said, during one particularly damning moment on the stand. When someone old starts forgetting things, everyone assumes it's natural. You just have to nudge things in the right direction, and the system does the rest. Valerie did not plead guilty. She maintained her innocence throughout, claiming that she had been manipulated by Dr. Holt, that she had only wanted what was best for our mother, that the financial transactions were misunderstandings that could be explained. Her lawyer was expensive, paid for, I later learned, with money she had borrowed against her share of an inheritance she had assumed was coming. The jury didn't believe her. They convicted her on 8 counts: elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraud, conspiracy. The sentencing hearing took 3 hours. The judge, a woman about my mother's age with steel gray hair and a reputation for severity, delivered her verdict without visible emotion. "Mrs. Valerie Morton," she said, "you have committed crimes against the most vulnerable member of your family. You exploited your mother's trust, her love, and the assumptions that society makes about elderly women. You conspired to strip her of her autonomy, her assets, and her dignity. And when confronted with the evidence of your crimes, you showed no remorse, only a desperate attempt to shift blame to others." She paused. The courtroom was completely silent. "This court sentences you to 7 years in federal prison. May you use that time to contemplate what you have done and who you have chosen to become." I visited Valerie once, 6 months after the sentencing. The prison was 3 hours north of the city, a low concrete building surrounded by chain-link fences and watchtowers, the kind of place that appeared in the background of news stories about mandatory minimums and overcrowding. She looked older. That was the first thing I noticed. The elegant veneer had cracked, revealing something raw underneath. The face of a woman who had finally run out of angles to play, stories to tell, lies to believe. Why did you come? She asked. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe because you're still my sister. Maybe because I'm trying to understand. Understand what? Why you did it? Why this? Mom would have given you money if you'd asked. She would have helped you. She loved you, Valerie. Even after everything, she still loved you. Valerie was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. She loved you more? That's not true. It is. It was always true. You were the smart one, the successful one, the one who made her proud. I was just there, taking up space, never quite good enough, never quite enough of anything. She laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off the concrete walls. Do you know what it's like to spend your entire life feeling like you're losing a competition no one else knows is happening? That's not why you did this. Isn't it? I thought, if I could just have something that was mine. Something I'd gotten for myself. Instead of waiting for it to be given, I thought it would feel different. She met my eyes. It didn't. It felt like nothing. And now, I have nothing. I sat with her for another hour. We didn't talk about the case or the money or the lies. We talked about childhood, about our father, dead 15 years now, but still present in both our memories. About the house we'd grown up in, the summers at the lake, the ordinary moments that had accumulated into a shared history. When I left, Valerie said, "Tell Mom I'm sorry." You could tell her yourself. She'd come if you asked. Valerie shook her head. I can't see her, not here, not like this. A pause. Maybe someday, when I figure out how to be someone worth seeing. My mother lived for another 6 years. They were good years, rich with the small pleasures that fill the lives of people who have learned not to take anything for granted. Sunday dinners with Emma and her husband, the grandchildren born 3 years after the trial. The babies, who would never know the great aunt who had tried to steal their inheritance. Long afternoons in the garden she'd tended for half a century. Quiet evenings with books, with music, with the kind of peace that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you value. She died on a Tuesday morning in September. The leaves just starting to turn. The sky the same impossible blue it had been on the day she walked into that gathering and changed everything. She went in her sleep, exactly as Valerie had once claimed. But this time, it was true. And this time, I was the one who found her, sitting by her bedside with a cup of tea that had gone cold, feeling the world reshape itself around a new absence. The funeral was quiet, just family and close friends, the people who had known her longest and loved her best. No dramatic revelations, no hidden truths. Just the simple, devastating fact of loss, which is the one thing all the planning in the world can't prepare you for. Valerie did not attend. She was still in prison, 3 years into her sentence, and my mother had left instructions that she not be informed until after the service. I don't want my death to be about her, the note said. I've spent enough of my life that way already. The reading of the will happened 2 weeks later, in Margaret Chen's office. I already knew what it would say. My mother had shown me the documents years earlier, had walked me through every provision, every contingency. But there was something formal about hearing it spoken aloud. Something that made it real in a way that private knowledge couldn't. My mother had been more wealthy than I'd realized. Not extravagantly so, but comfortable. The accumulated result of 50 years of careful investment, prudent saving, the kind of financial discipline that doesn't make headlines, but builds the foundation for everything else. The house, the accounts, the investments my father had made before he died. All of it had been protected, grown, positioned for exactly this moment. The bulk of the estate went to me, with provisions for Emma and her children. There were gifts to charity, the church, the garden club, a scholarship fund at the university where she'd met my father. There was money set aside for Dr. Patel's clinic, for Margaret's work with elder abuse victims, for Robert Okafor to continue his investigations into financial exploitation. And there was a letter addressed to both of us, to me and to Valerie. Margaret handed it to me at the end of the reading, a thick envelope with my mother's handwriting on the front. She wanted you to have this, Margaret said. She wrote it the day after the trial ended. She said you'd know when to read it. I waited until I was home, until I was sitting in my kitchen, in the house I'd lived in for 30 years, surrounded by the ordinary objects that mark a life. Photographs, coffee cups, the worn spot on the floor where my feet rested when I read the morning paper. Then I opened the envelope. My darling daughters, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And the story I started telling 6 years ago has finally reached its end. I've had time to think about that story, about what happened and why and what it means. I've had time to think about both of you. Marianne, you came when it mattered. You asked questions when something felt wrong. You trusted your instincts, and those instincts led you to the truth. I have never been more proud of you than I was in those months when we worked together to build a case out of fragments, to turn suspicion into evidence, to stand up for something that mattered. You showed me that the daughter I raised became the woman I hoped she would be. Valerie, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if you'll want to. But I need you to understand something, even if you never accept it. I loved you. I have always loved you. Even when you were taking my money, even when you were conspiring to have me declared incompetent, even when you were planning to sell my home and put me in a facility where I would have been forgotten. I loved you. I still love you. What you did was wrong. Terribly, devastatingly wrong. But I don't believe it was the sum of who you are. I believe there is still good in you, buried under years of envy and fear, and the terrible conviction that you had to take what you wanted because the world would never give it to you freely. I hope that someday you find that good and learn to build a life around it. To both of you, I'm leaving this world with fewer regrets than I expected. I built a good life, I loved well, and I was loved in return. I made mistakes. God knows I made mistakes. But I tried to learn from them, and I tried to do better. My greatest hope for both of you is that you learn the lesson I've spent 80 years learning. That love is not a competition. That there is enough to go around. That the things worth having, family, integrity, the peace that comes from knowing you've lived honestly, cannot be stolen because they can only be earned. I love you both. I will always love you both. Be well. Be kind. Be worthy of the life you've been given. Mom. 5 years after my mother died, Valerie was released from prison. I didn't know how to feel about it. 11 years had passed since the phone call at 4:47 in the morning. 11 years since I'd driven to my mother's house in a panic. Since I'd learned the truth. Since I'd watched my sister be led away in handcuffs. In that time, I had become a grandmother. I had sold my house and moved to a condo downtown, closer to Emma and the children. I had built a life that was quieter and simpler, and I realized one morning while watching the sunrise through my kitchen window, happy. Valerie called me on the day she was released. I didn't recognize the number, and for a moment I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up, some instinct or curiosity, or the simple fact that I was tired of running from the past. Marianne? Her voice was different, smaller, rougher. The voice of someone who had spent 7 years with nothing to protect herself from her own thoughts. It's Valerie. I know. A long pause. I could hear her breathing unsteady, as if she was trying to work up to something. I read Mom's letter, she said finally. They gave it to me when I was released. Margaret sent it to the prison 3 years ago, but I wasn't ready to look at it. Not then. I waited. I'm not calling to ask for anything, Valerie continued. I know I don't have the right. I'm not calling to apologize either. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm sorrier than I know how to say, but I know that sorry doesn't fix anything. I'm calling because a breath, a tremor. Because I don't know who else to call. Because you're the only person left who remembers what our family used to be before I destroyed it. I thought about my mother's letter. I don't believe it was the sum of who you are. I thought about the woman I'd visited in prison, the woman who had finally stopped performing and let me see the fear underneath. I thought about all the years between then and now, and all the years that might still be left. Where are you staying? I asked. A halfway house, downtown. It's fine. They help you find work, get back on your feet. Are you free for lunch on Sunday? Another pause. Longer this time. I could almost hear her trying to figure out the angle, the strategy, the game being played, and then slowly letting go of all of it. Because there was no angle. There was just an invitation, offered without conditions. "Yes," she said, "I'm free. There's a cafe on Queen Street, a little place called The Open Door. I'll be there at noon." "Marianne," she stopped, started again. "Why? After everything, why would you?" "Because you're still my sister," I said. "Because Mom asked me to. Because I've spent 11 years building a life that I'm proud of. And part of that life means not being too afraid to give someone another chance." I paused. "That doesn't mean I trust you. It doesn't mean I've forgotten what you did. But it means I'm willing to sit across a table from you and see who you've become." "I don't know who I've become," Valerie said quietly. "I'm still figuring that out." "Then maybe we can figure it out together." The cafe was small and warm, the kind of place where the owner knows your name and your coffee order and remembers to ask about your grandchildren. I arrived early, claimed a table by the window, ordered a pot of tea I didn't plan to drink. Valerie walked in at exactly noon. She looked different. Older, of course, but more than that. The careful construction was gone, the elaborate facade she'd maintained for so many years. What remained was simpler, rawer. A woman in her mid-60s, with grey-streaked hair and tired eyes, wearing clothes that were practical rather than elegant, carrying herself with the careful posture of someone who had learned to take up less space. She saw me. For a moment, she just stood there, and I could see the calculation happening. The old instinct to plan, to strategize, to figure out the right thing to say. And then I watched her let it go. I watched her walk toward me with nothing but her own vulnerability. And I understood that something had actually changed. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sitting down. "Thank you for calling." We ordered coffee, made small talk about the weather, the city, the way the neighborhood had changed. We didn't mention the trial, or the prison, or the years in between. Not yet. We were learning how to be in the same room again, how to be sisters after everything we'd been through. Finally, Valerie said, "I've been thinking about something Mom wrote in her letter, about love not being a competition, about there being enough to go around." She looked down at her hands, wrapped around her coffee cup. I spent my whole life thinking she was wrong about that. Thinking that everything good was limited, scarce, that if someone else got it, there was less for me. I thought I had to fight for everything, grab what I could, win at all costs. And now? Now I think maybe she was right. Valerie looked up at me. "I had everything I thought I wanted, Marianne. The money, the control, the sense that I'd finally beaten you, beaten Mom, beaten the universe, that I thought had stacked the deck against me. And it felt like nothing. It felt like holding on to smoke. And when it all fell apart, I realized that I traded the only things that actually mattered for a handful of bank statements and a power of attorney form. I didn't say anything. I let her talk. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she continued. "I don't think I'd forgive me if I were you. What I did to Mom, what I tried to do, it was unforgivable. I know that. I've had 7 years to understand exactly how unforgivable it was. Every night, lying in a cell, thinking about the woman who raised me, who loved me, who I tried to steal everything from." Her voice broke. I deserved what happened, all of it. Maybe I deserved worse. "Valerie, let me finish, please." She took a breath, steadied herself. "What I'm asking for isn't forgiveness. It's a chance. A chance to be different, to prove that I can be different. I know I can't undo what I did, but maybe I can build something new. Something that isn't based on taking or competing or trying to win. Maybe I can learn to be the kind of person Mom always wanted me to be." She was crying now, quietly, without performance. The tears of someone who had finally stopped hiding from herself. "I have a proposition for you," I said. Valerie looked up, surprised. "Mom left money for elder abuse prevention work. You know that. Margaret told you at the trial. There's a foundation now, growing every year. They need volunteers. People who understand how these schemes work, how predators target vulnerable families. People who've seen it from the inside." I paused. "If you're serious about being different, that might be a place to start. You'd let me work with Mom's foundation after everything I did? I'd let you volunteer. No access to finances, no decision-making authority. Nothing that would let you hurt anyone. Just work. Hard work for no pay, helping people who are going through what Mom went through. Proving that you meant what you just said." Valerie was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Why would you trust me with that? With anything?" "I don't trust you," I said honestly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I watched Mom spend the last years of her life believing that people can change. That even the people who hurt us the most have something good buried inside them, waiting to be found. I'm not sure I believe that the way she did, but I'm willing to test it. For her sake. And maybe a little bit for yours." Valerie reached across the table. She didn't touch me. She stopped just short, her hand hovering in the space between us. "Thank you," she said, "for giving me the chance to try." 3 years have passed since that conversation at the open door. Valerie volunteers at the foundation twice a week. She sits with families who are discovering that someone they love has been targeted, and she tells them her story, not as an excuse, not as a plea for sympathy, but as a warning. This is what it looks like. This is how it happens. This is what you can do to protect the people you love. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust her. The scar tissue from what she did runs deep, and some wounds don't heal cleanly. But I've watched her, over these 3 years, becoming someone I almost recognize. Someone who shows up, someone who puts in the work, someone who seems, finally, to understand that love is not about what you can take, but what you're willing to give. My mother's house was sold last year, not to a stranger, but to Emma, who wanted to raise her children in the same rooms where I'd raised her. I go there sometimes, on Sunday afternoons, and I sit in the garden my mother tended for 50 years, and I watch my grandchildren chase each other through the flower beds, and I feel something that might be peace. If you've ever lost someone and found them again, not the way they were, but the way they might become, then you know what I mean. The past doesn't disappear. The harm doesn't unhappen. But sometimes, if you're lucky, if you're patient, if you're willing to risk being hurt again, you find a way forward that doesn't require pretending the past didn't exist. You find a truth that includes the pain, but isn't defined by it. My mother left me many things when she died. Money, yes. Property, the tangible inheritance that lawyers count and accountants track. But the real inheritance, the one that matters, was something different. She left me the belief that truth is worth fighting for, that family is about more than blood, that the people we love are worth loving, even when they disappoint us, even when they betray us, even when forgiving them seems impossible. She left me the conviction that showing up matters, that asking questions matters, that paying attention when something feels wrong is not paranoia, but responsibility. And she left me this story. I've told it to you now, all of it, or as much as words can hold. The phone call at 4:47 in the morning, the lies and the truth beneath them, the patient gathering of evidence, the staged revelation, the years of aftermath that followed. I've told you about my sister's fall and her slow, uncertain climb back towards something that might be redemption. I've told you about my mother's brilliance, her clarity, the love she carried for both her daughters, even when one of them was trying to destroy her. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, I want you to know the truth is worth pursuing. Not revenge. Revenge is easy and empty and leaves you holding nothing but ashes. But truth, evidence, the quiet, methodical work of documentation and proof, the knowledge that you saw clearly, that you were not fooled, that you stood up for yourself and the people you love when it mattered most. And if you've ever been the one who betrayed, the Valerie in someone else's story, I want you to know something else. It's not too late. It's never too late to change. You can't undo the harm you've done, but you can stop adding to it. You can start building something different. You can become, slowly and painfully, and without any guarantee of forgiveness, someone worthy of the love you squandered. My mother believed that. She believed it until the day she died. I'm still learning to believe it too. For my mother, Eleanor Caldwell, 1937 to 2031, who taught me that the truth is always worth telling, and that love, real love, is not a competition. And for anyone who has ever been underestimated, may you find the strength to prove them wrong.